Hey, welcome. Sabria here. Happy Friday. I am coming today with our mental investment we're still reading out of Three Magic Words, U.S. Anderson. We're reading on immortality, which is chapter 11, and I'm just gonna continue from where we were yesterday. That which is, okay, we're talking about the animating presence. That which was never born, and shall never die, is the very being of each of us. One self, one mind, one life is in everyone. There is no difference between your neighbor and yourself except that of ego, of conscious mind. The difference you perceive is the difference brought about through thoughts. For your neighbor is a product of every thought that he has ever had, even as you are. Since it is impossible for two reactive beings ever to have the exact same kind and sequence of thought, there has never been, nor will there ever be two identical humans short of union with God. And union with God is achieved by all when the worn house of the body is laid aside at last. It may be achieved in life only when the individual ceases to think in response to the stimuli of the senses and originates thought at the center of consciousness. So this is saying that union with God is achieved by all when the worn house of the body is laid aside at last. It's telling you that it may be achieved in life only when the individual ceases to think in response to the stimuli of the senses and originates thought at the center of consciousness. So stop looking at logic, stop looking at what you see and basing your response on that, and base your response on the center of your consciousness, who you know you are. You're God, you're creator. Then, free of bondage of the flesh, he achieves power, control over all the circumstances of his life, because you become one with God. Everyone knows that he exists, and not simply because he observes other individuals responding to him. That which he feels himself to be, he knows as consciousness lying within his body, yet not his body. He observes other animated beings around him and correctly supposes them to be possessed of the same kind of consciousness as he. And he further observes death overtake the bodies of a few of these beings and notes that the animated presence has departed. He does not see where the presence has gone and is mystified, for he does not know if it has simply left or has suddenly ceased to be. He further observes that this condition of death or departure of the animated presence of the body is inevitable to all forms of life and thus is inevitable to him. And he vainly tries to peer beyond that event in order to determine if he might not still continue to exist after his body has ceased to function. Alas, the veil is too great for him, for he cannot imagine an existence without his body. And so at last he throws up his hands in despair and decides that his consciousness resulted from the fantastic array of circumstances that produced his particular body, and that on the other side of birth and the grave, there is nothing but oblivion. He could not, certain people cannot see beyond their life being beyond their body. And that's basically what this saying is saying. And because they can't, they believe that all life is lived in between birth and death. And after that, they can't foresee anything else but oblivion. The majority of people think that there's a heaven or a hell, though, which we talked about yesterday, I think. And I let you guys know that heaven or hell is how you vibrate on earth. You live a heaven or hell now, not later, afterlife. That is my belief. Okay, but no man completely accepts this delusion. No matter how loudly he may proclaim it, no matter how valiantly, okay, no matter how loudly he may proclaim it, no matter how valiantly he assumes to face his horrid assumption, there is something in him that knows differently. That something is self, the presence that animates his body, birthless, deathless, and ageless. It knows its immortality. So even if the human being cannot get past the life beyond a body, your true self, what's within you, knows that it is deathless, it is ageless, and it is immortal. So even if your human self, your human consciousness can't conceive of it, your soul knows. And when after death, when you pass, you go back to unity with God. You go back to that one self, that one energy. Okay, let's continue. Self is not body. Your body is not you. If it were and your leg were amputated, part of your consciousness would be lost with your leg. Neither are you simply brain. If you were only brain, then the rest of the physical body could be stripped away and the brain would continue to live. Actually, though, the brain itself does not even think. Some invisible thinker merely uses the brain as a central reception station for sensory perception. Someone, something is dwelling in your body, peering through the window of your eyes, listening at the portals of your ears, using your brain to receive impressions. Invisible, hidden, gowned with your particular form, but an instant in the eternity of its being. It uses your body as an idea, then discards it and departs to whence it came. This is immortal self. People want to know where they will go when they die, and the answer to that question is they will go everywhere, for they don't truly go, they simply expand. Self, freed from the limitations of body, becomes universal self, the consciousness of all time, all space, all form. Since self is free of all limitation and multiplicity, it leaves behind personality and ego and conscious memory, which becomes immersed like the tiniest drop of water in an infinite sea. Ego goes, limitation goes, and the inconceivably small I is replaced by the great I of infinity. A very intelligent but very egotistical man once said, "I cannot stand any conception of the afterlife in which I cease to be me and become somebody else, even if that somebody is much greater." And there are plenty of people whose idea of the hereafter hinges on there being plenty of social life, good food and good fellowship, lots of money and pleasure, and no pain. When it is pointed out to them that they will need to take their bodies along in order to enjoy these things, they nod with equanimity, apparently convinced that an exact replica of the one they leave behind will be furnished them in the hereafter. Behind every pair of eyes, it is always ego that blocks immortality from view. For ego cannot see beyond its own finiteness. It needs a body, needs separateness. For from these conditions it has sprung by separating from universal consciousness, from the universal subconscious mind is where the ego is born from. So it has to separate. If it was to go back, it would be overridden and you become one, your true self. So, okay, let me start over. Where was I? It is always ego that blocks immortality from view, for ego cannot see beyond its own finiteness. It needs a body, needs separateness, for from these conditions it has sprung, and it projects a hereafter that revolves around bodies and personalities. Body and personality and conscious mind change throughout life. Okay, this is good, so listen closely. Body and personality and conscious mind change throughout life. How shall they exist then in the hereafter of the ego? Will they be those which we possessed in the prime of life? Then what of the infant taken in death? What of the crippled and the chronically diseased? And how shall our characters and minds be in such a hereafter, as they were at the peak of life? But what about the feeble-minded and the insane, and the murderer and the robber and the depraved? A strange hereafter of confusion and injustice, with individuals longing for better bodies? Such is the hereafter of the ego. But we needn't worry about it because it doesn't exist. Beyond the advent of death, body does not persist, nor personality, nor ego, nor conscious mind. For all these things are the illusory trappings of finiteness, for which we have no further use when we return to the infinite. The great self enters into each body and becomes different according to what it enters, but upon leaving again becomes absolute infinity and unity. The infinite, says Emerson, lies stretched in smiling repose. And so does the immortal self, eternally one, the true being in every man, the observer who looks out upon the world through every pair of eyes. Reincarnation. One of the interesting theories held by those who demand a body as a prerequisite to any existence after death is that of reincarnation. Because conscious mind is a finite instrument and useless in dealing with infinity, even great religious thinkers of the past have been led into the trap of believing in reincarnation because they could not, with their conscious minds, conceive of any kind of existence at all without a body to accompany it. Only the Brahmins felt that the true existence was unity with universal subconscious mind. But even they felt that a man must consciously come to this illumination, holding that he would go through successive reincarnations on earth until he attained it. No religious teachers have ever surpassed the enlightenment of the Hindus with their Vedas and Bhagavad Gita and Upanishads. But even they could not forsake the illusory and transitory ego altogether, and thus were led into believing that individual men went through successive reincarnations before attaining to Brahma. It is immortal self which is incarnating in search of self-knowledge, and only when knowledge of self is complete will reincarnation cease. I'm going to read that again. It is immortal self which is incarnating in search of self-knowledge, and only when knowledge of self is complete will reincarnation cease. The real you, the immortal you, will reincarnate to be sure, short of its attaining to complete self-knowledge, but the transitory you, the built-up thoughts, habits, and memories of the conscious mind will incarnate no more. For it is only illusion, just a tiny instance in the eternity of evolution, whose very purpose is change. Ego would neither reincarnate nor persist after death. It is not the real you. It is scarcely even a microscopic part of the real you. Every incarnation is a reincarnation. Every child born is a reincarnation, for only one self enters each body and looks out of all eyes in its consciousness. Each of us is a reincarnation of every person who has preceded us. And the knowledge of all that has preceded us lies within us, in the universal subconscious mind, which has been all things and all people and all events and will be forevermore. That's why it's so important to tap into and to go into the stillness and the quietness of yourself, to meditate, to block out everything else that is tied to this tangible world. You have to learn how to quiet it and go into the center of you for your instructions, for your directions, And even for information, it just said that everyone who lived before you, the information of them is available and within us, and we access that through the universal subconscious mind. We all have a subconscious mind, which is directly tied to the universal subconscious mind, the subconscious mind of source. All is mind, the universe is mental. This is all happening in the mind of source. This is a projection. All of our reality is happening in our mind, and it's a projection. It feels so real, but it's a projection. It's illusory. Our true self is our soul. It's invisible. We cannot see it. And we need to go into the innermost part of ourselves to tap into it, to connect directly to it. And as we begin to understand the vibration and the frequency and the energy, our own energy, as we begin to understand and identify our own, and hey, Britt, as we begin to understand and identify our own energy, then in our conscious minds, we are able to move within it. But you got to learn that. You got to be intentional with that. You just can't be out here just doing what everybody else do, because half of what everybody else does is what they were taught to do, and which is in error for the evolution of self. So, because they're taught to look to an outside being or entity, and everything we need is right inside of us. No savior. No, there is no savior. So you need to learn how to tap into your sovereign self. All right, that is today's mental investment. Thank you for joining me, Sissy. I appreciate you being here. Did you say something else? Let me see. Can I see comments? I don't know that I know how to do that. I see it come. Oh, there it is. Hey, Bree, is this a book you're reading from? Yes, this is 3 Magic Words by U.S. Anderson. It's such a good book. I started reading it because of I heard Bob Proctor say that this was one of his favorite books, and you know he's one of my mentors. I love me some Bob Proctor. Have fun in the you know, I don't know what he's doing now, if he's come back or what, but yeah, this is the book, 3 Magic Words. Really, really good. All right, I will holler at you tomorrow. Love y'all. See ya.